If you want to practice all of the new PTE questions using artificial intelligence on an online portal that has a similar marking to your real PTE exam, head over to masterpte.com.au to create a free account. Here, you can practice all 4 sections separately and receive instant feedback for all of your speaking, writing, reading, and listening. You can also view and compare your answers with others who have already succeeded in achieving a high score. Download 9090 Band's template for speaking, writing, and listening. Take mock test, receive instant result, overall feedback, and in-depth analysis which helps you pinpoint exactly where you lose points. masterpte.com.au, the best PTE practice software in the world.
So we have a float plane, and then the earthquake itself occurred on this boat plane. The earthquake starts that particular point on the fault plane, and we call that the focus of the earthquake. And then the rupture propagates out from that point on the rupture plane to cover the entire full plane. That ruptures in that particular earthquake. We talked about the epicenter of an earthquake a lot. The epicenter is just the surface projection of the focus of the earthquake. So if we wanted to look in map view at where the earthquake was located, and we were able to look down into the earth, we would see the focus down at some depth near, or the epicenter is just the point vertically above that focus at the surface of the earth. Okay. So this is the relationship between fault and earthquakes. This block model that you can see here is the same block model that we were just looking at. It's a thrust fault of some kind. So we have rupture on this thrust fault. And as a result of that rupture, we see a seismic waves radiated away from the fault, so we get this displacement on the fault and radiated seismic waves away from the fault. If you were to go to a library at the end of the 1300s, or through the 1400s, you would probably find a book that was then, way more popular than those titles we still read, a book that purported to be a description of the world, a guide the traveling and distant lands of BC area and almanac of everything that was just off the horizon. I am not talking about Marco Polo. No, I'm talking about something far weirder and far less tethered to reality, a volume of medieval fantasy masquerading as a field guide called The Travels of Sir John Mandeville. Supposedly the titular knight set out from England in the 1330s and embarked on a journey that would take him to the Middle East, Africa and Asia, though as it will become apparent, not the Middle East, not in Africa and not in Asia that we would recognize here in reality. No, Mandeville spoke. It's not really about actually real foreign lands. It's about what Europeans thought was just outside the bounds of their civilizations. It's about what's beyond that mountain range that marks the borders of the lands you know. It's about what medieval people thought the foreign looks like. And all of it's mysterious, alluring and intimidating, unknown. So the title of my lecture today is Heinz 57, The History of English and the Rise of English as a Global Language. I know that John Slack gave you a lecture on English, the global language that you've had to run. Oh, he's going to say, the end of my lecture will lead on to what John Slack's going to talk to you about next time. So there'll be a link, and I've called my lecture, Heinz 57. Because English, as you've already read, is not a pure language. I don't think there really are any pure languages in the world. But English is definitely not a pure language. English, in fact, has borrowed from over 350 languages in its history. So it's a variety of many languages. Some people say it's like a dog, a Mongol dog, a dog that's been made up of many different dogs. The English language is like that. And by looking at the history of the English language, we learn about the history of the English people. The two things are closely connected. So in fact, today, we're not learning about language, but we're learning about history. In fact, the English has borrowed words from over 350 languages, has been viewed differently throughout history. So for example, in Shakespeare's time, people were very angry about words which were not they thought original English words, words which came from other languages they didn't like them. During times of war for example, World War II, German words were they tried to remove German words from the English language, but as we'll see from the lecture today, that was very difficult because the basis of English lies in Germanic languages, so it was very hard to remove all German words from the English language. This is creativity almost refocusing on the series as one huge importance, not only in academic disciplines but for society at large. In many areas of material, social and political life, people are being confronted by the increasing declaring inadequacies of existing systems for ensuring the survival and well-being of everyone on this planet. Now, there are many definitions of creativity, perhaps almost as many of people who study it, but here's my address of a common type of statement. Creativity refers to the phenomenon whereby human activity generates something new, that has some kind of value. And thinking about this, some people talk about the 3 Ps, the creative person, the creative process, and the creative product. Obviously, all 3 are needed, but it is a process that is key. Creativity is not a thing that sits inside the human brain as an abiding attribute. Neither does it manifest in the static final product, it shows itself in the complex, dynamic living process of bringing the production to being, that was not there before. Organization studies seem to draw on the whole family of social sciences, clearly psychology, clearly sociology, but also economics, anthropology, politics, as we said, philosophy to a degree, history, sometimes read literary studies, cultural citizen, so on and so forth. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And for me, that's absolutely the pleasure, and even on good days, the joy of doing organization studies, because it enables you, not just enables, but requires you, in some sense, to have some kind of broad familiarization of that sort. Now, there's a price to be paid for that. Because that kind of breadth, if you like, though I suppose that the cost of depth, and I guess there would be people who are clearly within academic disciplines of sociology or economics or whatever, who might say, well, these are sort of magpie-ish, amateurish kind of forays into our territory. You know, I wouldn't necessarily disown that idea. But I think that what studying organizations teach us and teaches me is actually the artificiality of those academic subdivisions. And as soon as we start, I've actually think about something like the organized world, then immediately, the kinds of things that come into focus are things that have traditionally been studied by different demands. And so, I think it's a liberating idea, the idea that we don't need to be bound by those strictures and structures of disciplinary division, and that we can be free actually to imagine and think about the social world through an agglomeration of techniques and ideas and theories and concepts from across the social sciences. Just think of the catastrophic failures of Victorian architecture that stood and fell, like Millbank Penitentiary. Our predecessors let these go, and we now look back with a sense of relief. Thank goodness that we don't have to spend our time and money keeping that one standing. But here I think we come to an incredibly important point. When we are dealing with buildings of the Victorian era or earlier, we are looking at a building stock that has already been rid of architectural flops. In a process of natural selection, the many thousands of buildings that were built or designed poorly have already fallen down or being modified and the faults rectified. But when we are dealing with buildings which are only 50 or 60 years old, we are often confronting design flaws or poor workmanship that are only just coming to light or are in the process of being rectified. This again challenges our perception of authenticity. Most historic buildings, by which I mean buildings 100 years or more old, have been adapted and modified to iron out design and construction flaws, and so their so-called original state is, in fact, an altered state in which they perform well, in fact often better than when they were first completed. Late 20th century buildings are still going through this Darwinian process of natural selection that will decide whether they will survive having been adapted or whether they will die as being unsuited to their function. So criticizing them for their design flaws may be seen as unfair. Now biology, or the study of biology, is responsible for some of the most profound insights that humans have about the world around them. So take a look at these 4 panels. On the upper left, you see some bacteria. This happens to be E. coli. You obviously see a butterfly flower, a dolphin. If you fell down from outer space and just looked at these different forms and structures, you'd have no idea that they were all related to one another. So one of the most profound things biology has taught us is all life on Earth is exceptionally related and similar to one to another. So for example, all of these life forms rely on DNA and RNA, for storing and transmitting and using their genetic inherited information. They're all based on cells. Cells are the fundamental building blocks of all life. All of these organisms consist of cells, and the cells essentially at the same time inside of them carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen and a whole bunch of other stuff in much smaller amount. All of these organisms conduct metabolism, in other words, chemical reactions that use and convert energy from one form to another. And the basic chemistry is all very similar to one another. The types of molecules that are used are all very similar to one another. This is my next contribution to New Zealand's super diverse future. The status quo is not sustainable. Super diversity stop-take, which I will talk to you about now, is designed to help us to adapt to a super diverse New Zealand to make sure that we fit for the future. Because New Zealand is super diverse right now, predominantly in Auckland, but actually throughout New Zealand here, where already 50% Maori Pacifica and Asian 44% are not born in New Zealand, and we have over 200 ethnicities. Now the definition academically of super diversity is 25% not born in New Zealand, 100 ethnicities. So we are almost double that number already. And Auckland will continue to become younger and browner as the Anglo-Saxon population ages and shrinks. So the mega trend here is not age. And the myth, the mega trend here is not urbanization, the mega trend is demography. It's a necessity. And we need to get our head around that, because most of the benefits from super diversity that we as a country are enjoying at the moment, such as greater innovation, productivity and advancement, increase New Zealand's financial capital, whereas most of the challenges from super diversity adversely affect New Zealand's social capital. However, if you don't mitigate the challenges to use social capital, you are not going to maximize sustainably the diversity dividend benefits for your financial capital. Fast radio burst is very much like what it sounds. It's a burst, it's a very fast burst of radio waves, comes from outer space long way away. And by fast, I mean really fast. So it starts and stops in about 1/1000th of a second. So you click your fingers and it's finished. First radio goes to a real mystery. We don't really understand exactly where they come from, or what actually makes them. And there's a lot of open questions that we really don't have an answer for. There are probably more theories about what makes fast radio burst, but then there are actual detections of these things. So since 2007, we've only had 20. But there are probably 30 or 40 different theories on what makes them. The most interesting thing about this burst is the fact that we found that we Australian square kilometre array pathfinder, so that is, it wasn't really obvious that we will be able to do this, as well as we ended up being able to do it. So this telescope is really a fantastic telescope. In fact, it's probably the best telescope on the planet at the moment for finding these bursts. And so whereas in the past, it's taken 10 years to find 20 bursts, once we're really going with this new instrument we'll be able to find them much more quickly whenever you can do 1 or 2 every week, and that will blow up in the field. So that will make it a much more. We'll be able to do much more detailed studies of these things, get better statistics, understand what that hopefully understand what they are and where they're coming from. Here in the wagon barn are some of the most important inventions in human history. Sure, you can see examples here of the wheel, or the automobile. That the inventions I'm talking about are the domestic appliances that allowed for increased leisure time, and redefined gender roles in society to a degree as never seen before in human history. The evolution of the washing machine, as demonstrated in this barn, is a representative example of this changing domestic life. For many centuries, sailors used to place their clothing in a cloth bag, tie the back to a rope and throw it overboard, letting the ship drag it for hours. The principle was simple: force water through the clothes to remove the dirt. But in the household before running water and electricity, Washington close to a staggering amount of labor to wash, boil and rent a single load of clothes to take care gallons of water, which had to be hand-carried from my pump or well. Hand-wringing, rubbing and lifting the clothes could expose women to caustic substances in the setups. The whole process for households' laundry could take an entire day or more as back-breaking labor, and 1846, a patented washing machine imitated the human hand moving cloth over a washboard by using a lever to rub the clothes between two red surfaces. This machine was sold in the U.S. as late as 1927. The first electric clothes washers, in which a motor rotated the tub, were introduced into America about 1900.
If you want to practice all of the new PTE questions using artificial intelligence on an online portal that has a similar marking to your real PTE exam, head over to masterpte.com.au to create a free account. Here, you can practice all 4 sections separately and receive instant feedback for all of your speaking, writing, reading, and listening. You can also view and compare your answers with others who have already succeeded in achieving a high score. Download 9090 Band's template for speaking, writing, and listening. Take mock test, receive instant result, overall feedback, and in-depth analysis which helps you pinpoint exactly where you lose points. Masterpte.com.au, the best PTE practice software in the world.